about our lives and how God has been at work in our lives and the ways that He's allowed us to participate in His kingdom work. Can you hear me well enough?
No. Now I
No?
can.
There,
Talk
that
to
better
you. There you
good.
go.
Okay, I'm sorry. All right, so we have been married for 37 years now. There we go. So when we first started, first of all, I just want to get out on the table that, you know, we're not special, we're not extraordinary, we're not amazing. We just show up and do what God asked us to do or what we felt that He was leading us to do. We're just as sinful as anybody else. There's nothing like challenging children that just reveals the depths of depravity of your own heart and the ways that God continues to scrape us and change us through them. So as I say, we were married, and I think our original plan was maybe 3 or 4 kids. That was what we thought we would do.
That's what we thought.
What we thought. So, and I think it's interesting that you know, that you've been asking people, well, how do you know it's God's will? And I guess when we both turned 60 this year, so there was a little kind of a birthday for reflection of like, okay, well, good portion of my life is done, and you know, hopefully I have another 30 or 40 years to go. What do I want to do with that? And as I look back and saw how did God work and what did He accomplish, and as I was thinking about how God moved us and shaped us, and I think that you know, God fashions us for works, right? That He knew us in the womb, He created us. I feel like He created me, Audrey, to really love babies. I love to be busy and I like physical work. And He also gave me this kind of this passion for orphans. And I think He put that in me to make me ready for the things that He had for me later in my life. He also, you know, gave us the gift of good health, and not just health, but vigor, energy, strength to do the work that He has called us to do. So I think all of that was in place. And then, you know, when I was a child, I was always interested in orphans. I would rescue hurt animals, and and I had my own Compassion International child that I supported with my allowance because, you know, the plight of orphans always stirred my soul. So when I think how God moves circumstances, and I think He uses, like, shapes us and kind of channels us in the direction He wants us to go, or maybe even knowing that that's the way we would go given this circumstance, or a little bit of pressure in our life, we would go this direction because of the way He uniquely gifted me or changed or, you know, made me to want and desire certain things. It was easy then to shape and move me. I often think of a verse in Proverbs that, you know, a man's heart plans his way, but the Lord directs his steps, right? I have ideas, and then the Lord actually just moves and guides me through those things. So with that in mind, and I think of the ways that God has also just shaped and moved in things to accomplish His will, His plan that He laid out in the Bible, you know, moving people and nations, particularly like using world circumstances to force them into another country because of a famine, or just things like that you shape and push them in or disperse them across the Asia to spread the gospel because of the political pressures that were going on. And He used all of that to, like, accomplish His wills. So I think that He did that a lot in our lives, using circumstances, using kind of things that were going on at the time to kind of challenge us or channel us into a particular direction in our life. Like I said, we only wanted 3 to 4 kids. We had 3 kids, boom, boom, boom. We did, and then we wanted maybe just one more, right? And it always seemed like the problem was, how do we make this stop? And then it worked out that actually we had trouble having any more after that. There's some miscarriages and then some infertility. And I had one time after the 3rd miscarriage, I said, okay, Lord, it was a very noble prayer, I thought. If you don't want us to have any more, then just, you know, please just let it not achieve a pregnancy at all. And I thought it was a very noble and wonderful prayer. And of course, God would say, no, of course I want you to have more. So of course it will work out. And then, 6 months or so goes by, and I'm like, huh. The answer was no. Okay, now what, right? And about that time, also during that time period, another wonderful gift that came out of this kind of process of shifting towards doing foster care and adoption through foster care was that at the church we were going to, they had started a Bible school, and there were some women that I would meet with for a Bible study, and I was always involved in Bible study. I read my Bible, I prayed, and yet when I went to a Bible study, there were some women who just spoke so passionately about the Word. They loved it. They were so excited about that. And I thought, I don't quite feel that way. I mean, I wish that I did, but I can't say that I do. And I don't know that God, I didn't actually pray that, but God heard that or knew I was thinking of that, or that was kind of like a thought of like, I kind of want that for myself too. Anyway, He used all of the sadness and the grief processing through miscarriages to actually, I had trouble processing some of it. I thought I didn't like to do sad feelings, so I actually started getting out my Bible and spending time in the Word, usually in the Psalms, and and the Lord kept me company during those times. The times I was afraid to face my feelings and work through them, God was my company. And at that moment, I finally understood that verse in Hebrews where God's Word is active and living, right? And I thought, it was such a transformative experience. This new love and fervor for His Word and love for it, that I think without that too, I would not have been willing to go as forward with adoption either. So, wonderful gift that came out of it. I would never regret, any of that hardship then, because I got this wonderful gift of a great love for God's Word. So during that time of processing, though, I started running into someone we'd gone to church with at our first church. I ran into her like 6 different times. I hadn't seen her in 6 years, and suddenly I'm running to her all over the place. And they had done a foster adopt, and so I started researching that. And for us, foster care, that kind of stuff had always been on the periphery of our life. Bruce had worked in a group home for developmentally challenged kids. We had taken on a kid as like a practice family when they had that program going on before we had our own children. We did some respite foster care, so it was always kind of there on the side. So then we started seriously exploring foster to adopt, and at the time, the literature out there that we were thinking about a baby, so it would always most likely be a drug-affected baby. And the only literature was out there was like on cocaine babies, and that was all from the 80s, and it was frightening, and it was really hard to, think. There's so many things they said they were monsters, they had no conscience, and then by the time, I finished reading all of these things, I thought, I don't know what to do, so I just shelved it for a bit, and then we decided, okay, we'll just do it. And so we wound up getting our first son a little unusually. We had signed up with an agency, and then my friend from church says, I have this baby, I think you just have to call this person. I'm like, I don't think it works that way. I don't think I'm supposed to go out and find my own place, but I think they're supposed to call me. But she says, she says she was a foster mom who, her husband was the district rep for the EV Free Churches. She did all these babies, and she got them kind of in a good place and then moved them on. So we wound up doing some respite for her, and so she kind of pushed the wheels a little bit, and then finally said that worked the system, got him ready, so that they said, she said, he's ready to move on. So we wound up getting our first foster adopt kid, and we adopted him.
He's 28 now.
He's 28 now, and still struggling a little to find his ways in adulthood, but still always stays connected with us. Then our next one arrived. We were signed up to do kind of emergency, very temporary receiving care with an agency, and they called in the middle of my son's 9th birthday party, our oldest. They said, do you want a 3-day-old baby? I said, yes, of course I do. So they said it was 2 weeks tops. I said, okay, sure. But I have to go, we're taking my kids and their friends to the pool. I have to go in the pool. So it has to be after that when we pick up, so they met us in the parking lot at the pool. You know, it was a dark and stormy night, literally. We came home and the baby, she did not sleep. She just cried. She was going through drug withdrawals. She only slept when she was being held. So by the end of the weekend of holding her pretty much relentlessly, I decided I wanted to keep her. But we were just this holding spot while they went through their list of people who were on their list to adopt, and they had to go through them first. So we kept waiting and waiting, and it turned out they all said they know. They passed on her. So that was 25 years ago. She's still with us. We're grown now, and so she's finding her way. So you see it, you know, all of our kids, some of them struggled and some of them have made it well right from the beginning, but you know, their story's not done. So as long as they're living, they're, you know, the Lord still has a chance to bring them to Himself and work out all the things that sin has taken from them, all the tangles and things. You know, the problem with these kids who have been damaged or had sin done to them, either like in the womb because of drugs, or, you know, some type of abuse after they've been born, is that sin then sets them up for some type of sinful response to that then ensnares them in another life of sin, and it's just this perpetual cycle that goes on and on. So we're always praying that, you know, to break that cycle, you know, to break that pattern of sin in them, that they're so vulnerable to choosing. Then after that girl, we got her half sister. About a year.
After we had talked about, did we want to have more?
Well, I think we always said yes. We always said yes that we would take a sibling, right?
We did.
We did say that.
Yeah,
and
we
then we got a call. It was actually on my birthday. About a baby they had. They said, "Well, might need you." I'm like, "Okay, I'll stand on by." And I didn't hear anything all the week. I thought, "Okay, they did need us." And then I heard later in the week that they did, and it was actually our daughter's half sister, whose mom had. Decided that she was going to go and still associate with the dad, where there was a restraining order against him. So they were going to remove the baby. I knew about her because I had met the mom during her pregnancy. She was in a special program at the University of Washington Hospital for pregnant women who were going through drug remediation, drug withdrawals, and, you know, drug rehab. That's the word I'm looking for. So I met her, and she said that if she had a chance to just see our daughter, that we had at least one more time, that then she'd be willing to relinquish her rights and for an open adoption. So I did know that there was a sister involved, and there was going to be a sister. So we got the call, we went and got her, and I kind of thought it would just be like easy, but actually she wound up going back to her mom. Her mom did the things that the judge required, and she went back for 3 days at the time. You know, it felt like I thought, oh, wow, I'm surprised. So she went back for 3 days, and then they called us and said, do you want her back? We said, yes, of course. You say where, when, we'll come and meet you, we'll pick her up. And then, so then she's now happily married and living in Pennsylvania, with giving us 3 grandkids now. And then and all of these things along the way, kind of like grew, I think, our willingness to do something that doesn't quite fit the traditional family life or the trajectory for a young family, by taking in kids that weren't born to us, or maybe they had some difficulties. And I also think that it kind of helped set us up for going into full-time ministry, making us ready to say yes to another step away from kind of the traditional way of doing things, and, you know, the American middle class life as a young family. Once we were in ministry,
Yeah, you're going to talk about
right.
the
Once we were in
surprises,
ministry,
the 2 surprises.
that's right. Back when I was asking the Lord whether we could have any more, and I thought the answer was no, but it actually turned out it was just no, not yet. 11 years from now, then we'll do that.
Yes, while we're in ministry.
So 11 years later, we had our son, who's going to be 21 this coming week. That was actually turned out to be like 4 years after a vasectomy. And we're like, oh, wow. So that was a surprise.
It was.
And then 5 years after that, we had our last biological baby. And again, I'm like, and we're actually kind of in talks with a social worker for a very disabled little baby down in Southern California, and kind of talking outside the box about maybe we could be a placement. It was a really needy kid, and I think that also then too planted the seeds of kind of growing our willingness to consider a lifetime commitment to someone who maybe was going to be disabled. And then we wound up being pregnant, so of course that became not an option anymore. I was actually really disappointed. I thought, who's going to take care of that kid now? But it turns out that there was another family actually down in Southern California with experience that, so the baby was taken care of and had a home from him. So
Is it my turn now?
it's your turn now. Yeah, it's your turn. All right.
We didn't have quite a smooth transition,
No,
but
sorry, we didn't plan that. Yeah.
but that's all right. But anyways, so picking up from where our daughter, who's now 16, Emma, she just celebrated. She just had her 16th birthday this week, and she's quite a on fire Christian, and we're really excited about her. And so we were in ministry at that time, and we had gone into serve with an organization called Village Missions, and they focus on mission work, and I was also the pastor in rural communities in the U.S. and Canada, and their motto was keeping country churches alive, because when they started back in the 40s, when Reverend Duff started Village Missions, it was literally, country ministry, really country, and there still are rural areas, and so Village Missions focuses on keeping those rural churches, and where they still are rural. There's some that aren't anymore because urban expansion has eaten up, and kind of incorporated them, but a lot of them are still very, there's still quite a few rural churches that are being served by Village Missions, and so we felt God calling us to do that, and so we started that in 2003, and then of course, like Audrey said, we had Ben, and that was a very big surprise to us and to me, and because as she was saying, I took steps to make sure that we didn't have any more kids, but the doctor did say, he said, these things, this surgery can fail, and I said, what? I said, no way. So, at the time I thought, well, that was the worst pain that I could go through as a man, but I watched my wife deliver 5 children, and so I don't have a leg to stand on, but anyways, and so we were in Oregon, and then we were in Colorado for a year, and then we ended up leaving that church after a year because of some troubles with some of God's people in the church, and just some difficulties, and it was a good year though, because we really grew a lot as a couple, and we've always really, the thing that's really holds us together is we work as a team. I mean, we're very opposite, and I'm usually the very talkative one, and when we decided who was going to go first, I said, well, why don't you go, because I probably would just stand and talk since I'm a pastor, I could go for a good hour, but so so we were in Colorado, and then we ended up coming to California, and when we were in ministry, I said, one place I never want to go serve is California. I vowed, I said, Lord, you can send me anywhere you want to, just not California, because I heard all these stories, and now that we're here, I never want to leave California. I mean, I really don't. There's just such a mission field, and actually, as it turned out, when we got to our little community north of here in Bangor, it's up north here about an hour, up near Oroville, and right at the base of the foothills. Some of you are nodding your heads. I know where Bangor is. You've probably driven through and blinked your eyes, because it's only a population of about 500 people, and We ended up staying there for 9 years, and we had just a great ministry there, and you know, we saw the Lord, you know, grow that ministry, and then, you know, it would wane down because people would leave, as it is in a lot of rural communities. People come for a while and then they go, and so anyway, so then after we had Emma and we were there, Audrey had started to go back to school, and partly because if something would happen to me, we wanted to make sure she had a good paying job, so she started going to school at Butte College to be a respiratory therapist. And Butte College is one of the better schools in California to go for respiratory therapy, and we just happened to be placed coincidentally, not coincidentally, but we just happened to be placed in Bangor, California, right near Butte College, and so Audrey could go to school there, and she was able to get in. And then we had Emma, so she was already accepted to go to the school part after all of her prerequisites, and then so then after a year after Emma had been born in 2010, she started school full time. So I was at home with Emma, and we were balancing ministry together, and Emma, and I learned how to bake bread during that time, and became pretty handy on things and in the home, and somewhat, you know, but anyways, and so then Audrey got done with school, and during that time we started to have some challenges with our older three that we had adopted, and we had a very, very challenging time with the three of them, and you know, we were just it was a very tense time. It was you know, I was kind of fearful that people might find out what was maybe happening, and we might not be able to serve anymore, and what would we do? And but you know, the Lord was telling me, you know, you just be faithful and go do your, you know, what I've called you to do, and you know, and we made it through that little rough patch, and God was really faithful, brought us some good people to counsel us on some of the things that we were facing with our oldest son, and well, not our oldest son, but our oldest of the adopted sons, the one that's 28, and we were kind of talking about that last night and at the table, but you know, but God was really faithful and brought us through that, and you know, there's the verses that talk about not worrying, and you know, you can't add a day to your life if you're worrying, and I really learned a good part of that, because I tend to worry. Probably, you know, I'm the worrier generally, and Audrey is usually pretty steady and will say, no, don't worry about it, you know, we'll be fine. And so through all that, I've learned now that I can say, well, we don't need to worry about that, you know, we'll be fine. And so the Lord really brought us through that. So then through all that, then we were still doing foster care, and we had made a decision towards around 2014. I had just been kind of getting burned out from everything that had gone on with our kids, and just ministry was, you know, is having some effects on our kids, and I was really very concerned about them, and we both were. And so about a year before we actually moved, we took a month off of a sabbatical, and we tried to leave ministry behind. We actually had a man commit suicide while we were on.
First day we got away.
Yeah, first day we got away. We were fortunately just over here in Cameron Park. We had rented a house, and so we were there. And somebody called and said that his name was Mike, and they said Mike had committed suicide, and I had just, you know, baptized him and his wife, and they had really become, strong Christians. Their daughter was going to church, her adult daughter, and she had really turned her life around, and she just started coming to church. She just started one day, and she just kept coming, and it was really neat. But yeah, so I had to go back one day, and fortunately we were close enough. I took a day off, even though I was on a sabbatical. But this is how rural ministry is. You don't usually get to just say, well, I'm on vacation. I know a lot of pastors who would be called back for a lot of other things, funerals, and I never had that, but I had this happen, and so anyway, so we were on sabbatical, and we just talked about what we wanted to do, and we started praying about, if we wanted to step away from ministry, where did we want to go, and we kind of felt like we wanted to come to Sacramento, because we had come down here from time to time. Our son Ben had some medical issues and required some testing down here at Sutter, so we had brought him down, and every time we came down into the city, I was like, oh, the city, city life, and because we had lived in the city for so long, and so when we were up in Washington, and so anyways, at that time we started to make the decision, but we were still doing foster care. We had just given away a set of twins. They went back to their dad, and so we were kind of heartbroken. We came back from sabbatical, and we had made some decisions about stepping away, and we had asked the Lord, a few things. We had said, well, Lord, if this is meant to be, then, we felt like Audrey would be the one that could get a better paying job than I could at the time, and since she was already working at UC Davis on a per diem basis, we thought, well, if the Lord wants to open this up, then it'll be. If it doesn't, we'll just keep on serving and doing what the Lord calls us to do, and but during the time, then we got two little boys. We had gotten back from sabbatical. We got one little boy. His name was Johnny, and then his mom was expecting another baby, and his name was Jack, and Jackson, and we called him Jack, after the Incredibles movie, the little baby Jack, and he was a preemie. He was born prematurely right in the parking lot up at the hospital in Paradise. That was before it burned down, and so, but it was, it was probably the best hospital in the area outside of Chico. But anyway, so Jack had been born. He had been flown down to UC Davis of all places, and was in the NICU. So we started going down to see him because we had Johnny, and they asked us if we'd take Jack because we had space and in our home, and it was always kind of interesting because whenever we got any of our kids, we always just seemed to have space to be able to take the kids that we did. Ended up adopting and just for different things that led us to do other things in foster care. So we got Jack. He was a preemie. He was about the size of my hand when we got him, and we came down one day and I was just holding him, and he was just so fragile, but I just looked at him and I'm like, you are such a, what a precious little life. And it was amazing that he was there, and he was at UC Davis, and where Audrey was working, and so then we brought Jack home, and so we had Johnny and Jack, and then they ended up going to their aunt and uncles, they live in Nevada now. But it kind of just started opening us up to medically fragile children. Jack had some needs, but not anywhere near what we've had in our time. But anyway, so we had set up. We had been praying and waiting, and Audrey came home one day and she says, I forget how she exactly worded. What did you say? You said. She said, we've got an answer, or she said, something to the effect of,
I got the job.
Something about the job. And so she had interviewed, and we were just kind of waiting, and they were only going to hire one person. Well, they ended up hiring two people, and so Audrey was the other person that they ended up hiring. She had scored really well, which, she's a genius and brilliant, and that's why I married her, and she was. She married me, so that tells you how, because I'm, she's a brilliant woman, and so she got the job at UC Davis, and so we kind of went, well, I think the Lord is opening a door for us to step away, and so we did, and it was a big step. It was heartbreaking because we really loved where we were living, and I've had opportunity to go back and fill in sometimes while we've been down here, but that was in 2016. So then when we got down here, we started up doing foster care ministry right away, because that was our other ministry, and up to that point, I think we had about 20, maybe about 25 children in our home in different stages, and including the ones that we had
Different states.
at different states. Yeah, we had one in Oregon, and we didn't have any we had just gotten certified in Colorado, and then we moved, so that we didn't have anyone there, but that was okay because we had our hands full. But so we got to California, and we had a few kids while we were out in Bangor. We had actually a couple of sibling sets and a set of twins that we really thought we were going to adopt, and we thought we might get Johnny and Jack, and that would have just kind of stopped everything, because we would have just ended we probably would have stopped then. So we came down to Sacramento, and we started to do foster caring again, and we got a little girl by the name of Allie, and we had Allie in October. She came to us, and we had just moved in July. So that was in 16, and then we started going to Fremont, and anyways, so then we got Allie, and then a little while later we ended up getting 3 children at once. We had Allie, and then we got another little boy who had he had a pump that he needed to pump his
Yeah, a central line and a G tube
Right.
for his feet, because he's a shortcut kid.
Yeah, he was a shortcut. He didn't have all his intestines,
Right.
and so
Couldn't absorb any food.
So Angel was his name, and he would get his feeding at night, and sweet kid, just really, we just really loved him a lot, and so we had Allie and we had Angel, and then we got a call from a social worker, and she said, would you be interested in taking a third child? And I understand we had our son Ben at home, and we had Kira and Jaden and Anna. Or no, Anna was living out of the house then. She was renting then, so we didn't have her. But we had Ben and Emma, and we had Kira and Jaden, and so we had them, and then we had the two foster, Angel and Allie, and then they said, would you be interested in taking a third? And I said, well, we're at max capacity, and they said, well, we'll get around that. So they got around that. The social worker filed some paperwork, talked to our licensor, and Virginia was just great. And she said, are you guys sure you want to do this? And we said, yeah, we're sure. And so then that's how we got Mari, who's now 9. And Mari came to us, and she had some significant complications before she was born. She had we were just talking about it last night, but she had amniotic banding,
digits, and clubfoot.
Yeah, and clubfoot. So anyways, and so she came to us, and we didn't know how long we were going to have her. We thought she was going to be short term.
She was just supposed to be for a really long weekend.
Right.
Because they were going to go through the list of these people who had said that they were interested, and they're going to go find out if they were interested for taking her as a foster adopt placement, and then
They
those
didn't.
fell through. So
It fell through, so we
She
ended
stayed.
up keeping Mari, and she's still with us, and so we just made the decision, and it just came to she just being with us long enough. We just always felt that we never wanted to see the kids that we felt that would come up for adoption to go back in the system. I always just felt like that would be incredibly hard, based on stories we'd heard and talking to other people, and just different things we'd read about. I thought, what a horrible thing to be in the home, and then you're there for a while, and then boom, you're now you have to go to your adoptive family, which works out all right, but it you know, and some people do that. That's just their calling, if you want to say, or their. But that wasn't ours. Ours was, you know, for some reason.
Our yes to a place
Yeah.
like Cosmo was usually
Yeah.
yes now, and most likely yes forever.
Yeah.
The way we looked at
Yeah,
it.
we always kind of just kept it, and sometimes when we get kids, we'd say, now, if you need them to stay longer, we have no problem with that. And so that's how we got Mari, and she's had several surgeries since she's been with us, and that was kind of our start into more of the medically fragile, along with Angel. Angel went back to his mom. Allie went back to her mom. She was actually over at St. John's, her mom was. And so, you know, when we've had St. John's here, we really identify with them because Allie's mom went through and recovered and, you know, got Allie back. And so then we had a few more boys, and there we had a little boy with an ostomy, and he was a real cutie. And then in 2019, we had this little boy that we had, and we got a call for this little girl who was about a month old, and she was going through drug withdrawals, and so we got this little curly-haired girl. Well, eventually, she had kind of wild hair, and then it turned into being kind of curly, and that little one was Annie. Some of you know Annie. You know, she's running around usually, and very busy. And so we got Annie in 2019, and then in January of 20, we got another little boy that we thought we were going to be able to keep, but he ended up, and that was during COVID, so it was a really interesting time because Annie had relatives in Nevada, and they were going to adopt her. Her aunt and uncle had her brothers, and Annie got flown to Las Vegas, where her aunt and uncle lived. And you know, when we talked to her aunt and uncle on video visiting, you know, it always kind of felt like it just didn't seem like they were really like enthused or like asking a lot of questions. They just seemed, something to me, at least when I was listening to them, you know, I was like, something's kind of off here, you know. And so, but Annie left, and she cried, you know, quite a bit. She was, you know, by then she wasn't quite a year yet, but
It was 9 months.
she was 9 months, and so she flew to Vegas, and lo and behold, about a week later, we got a phone call from the social worker, and we still had MJ, the little boy, and the social worker called back and said, would you be interested in taking Annie back, and you might have to fly down and get her. And we were, because it was when the window was opening and then it was closing, you know, because of the COVID restrictions, and they're like, you're gonna have to hop a plane and get down there and pick her up, and we'll give you all the paperwork and everything, and then you can bring her back. And it ended up that the social workers were able to go down and get her, so we didn't have to, but we were scrambling one weekend just to try to, okay, can
We're on
we get
our
a
way
flight?
out to Stinson Beach, and I'm scrolling, finding the flights, a
Yeah.
car.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, we're
Here
trying
we
to find
are.
all this stuff, and so, but they ended up going and getting Annie, and then Annie came back, and MJ went down where his brother and sister were, and so that was kind of heartbreaking because we really, really loved him a lot, and but then we got Annie, and of course we ended up adopting Ann, and she's 6 now. And then we moved. We bought our house that we have now. We had just moved, and I was working at FedEx Freight, and so right when COVID was starting to stop in 2021, 2020, towards 2021, I was still working for FedEx Freight over in West Sacramento, and you know, it had been a very hectic year just because of COVID and everything kind of ending, and work was really hectic because it was busy, and I got a little, not that I was burned out, but I was just, you know, we were thinking about it, you know, the kids going back to school then, because they were going to all start going back to school, and Audrey would usually run the kids to school in the morning, and so we started talking, and I said, you know, how how are you going to get them all to school on time? And I said that, you know, and I had a good job because I worked early in the morning so I could get home and be home for the rest of the day, but I wasn't there in the mornings when they needed to, so to go to school. So Audrey was going to have to do that. I said, you know, there's no way you're going to be able to get to work, and you know, this. And I said, why don't I just retire, sort of? And I said, I think, you know, we'll be fine. And I said, you know, let's just see. And so my work really wanted to keep me. My boss was really, he said, you can't leave. He said, you have to stay. And I said, well, you know, he said, but if you have to, you know, and they tried to work around to see if I could, and it just ended up working. So anyway, the day I left, I got out to my car, and I get a phone call from a social worker, and she says, hi, she says, I'm calling because, you know, we have this child in custody, and it's a little boy, and he's related to somebody you've adopted. And I'm like, well, it can only be, you know, Annie, and we knew Annie's mom hadn't had any more, and we had Mari, and so we thought, okay, maybe it's Mari. And then there were our other three, and thought, you know, gee, did mom have another one? Or, you know, one of the kids, you know, we didn't really ever meet Josiah's, our 28-year-old now. We never met his mom, but she had several kids before him. And then, so anyways, so we're like, well, who is it? Well, it turned out it was Mari's mom. And so they said, well, you know, do you have room? And we said, yeah, we have space. And we had a little girl. We had another little girl at the time, which her name was Kaylee. And some of you might remember Kaylee. We brought her in quite a bit. She was our first really complex, medically fragile child. She had a shunt, and she had a heart condition, and she had just had a litany of, I mean, she saw almost every specialist at UC Davis, and close to it. But you know, she had a head shunt, and we had just gotten her in May, so this was in August, and they said, you know, would you be interested in maybe taking Jaquay as a placement? You know, we don't know how, he's with a foster family, and you know, but you're a relative, and you'd be a relative placement, and sort of because of that, the way the rules are, sort of as a relative placement, you kind of get dibs on if you want to adopt. If it comes to that, you kind of get precedence because of relative adoption. But we didn't think about that, sort of. But again, you know, we've always, you know how we've thought. So, you know, so we got Jaquay, and we met his foster family that he was with, and so then he came to live with us, and you know, his mom, you know, we knew his mom, and Audrey had met his mom, and so she knew us, and she just decided she wanted to put him up for adoption, and she wanted us to adopt him. And so so that's how we got Jaquay, and he's 6 as well now. He was born in August of 2019. Annie was born in September, so they both have you know, relatively close birthdays, and so that's how we got Mari. And so we had Kaylee at the same time that we were going through all this, and Kaylee ended up going back to her mom, and that was a very, very hard time for us because we had put in like a whole year. We were it was, when you have medically complex children, it is pretty much your full-time job. And so so we had Kaylee, and you know, we just, even when she went back, you know, we knew we weren't going to be able to fight her going back, but we always just kind of felt in our minds, you know, oh boy, you know, because she had just a lot of needs. She just had a lot of complex needs, and her mom was very young, and it was very hard. I can see, you know, like where we live, you know, we would go up Watt Avenue and cross Auburn Boulevard and go drop Kaylee off at her mom's apartment where her and her boyfriend were living, and had a very hard time. After we gave Kaylee back, I would get very angry and resentful as I drove up to Auburn Boulevard, because it just brought up that we had to give up because we felt like she was our little girl, and so she ended up going back, and so then we had no one for a little while, and then we got this little girl for about a month in January of 2022, and so she had PKU, which is really easy. It's just a blood disorder. So metabolic disorder. So she was easy. I mean, she was not like Kaylee was. Kaylee required a lot, and so we had spent a lot of time in the hospital with Kaylee when her shunt would block, and so they'd have to go in and unclog the shunt, or they ended up eventually replacing it. But we spent some nights with her in the hospital and got to know the staff at UC Davis. So, and of course Audrey was working there full time, and she was in the pediatric pulmonary unit by then, and so she was working outpatient. And so then in March of 22, Audrey was talking to the social worker at UC Davis, and he was talking to her about Kaylee, because Kaylee had gone back into the hospital. She had some heart complications, and she was back in the hospital.
Okay, let's tell her this. Her mom wrecked her.
Yeah.
He was, life flighted to UC Davis to get fixed back up. So
yeah.
Then she was going to be discharged to her grandmother, where she would be safe. So.
Yeah. Her grandmother was a good placement. So, but we actually were in church the day that Kaylee got life flighted. Her mom, we had kept in contact with her mom, and her mom had been doing pretty well with her, but like Audrey said, in December of 21, she just kind of fell off, and Kaylee really suffered during that month. We figured out that she hadn't gotten some of her meds, and she was supposed to be on a vent at night, and she wasn't, and so that consequently resulted in her heart having to overwork, and she got filled with fluid, and because she had congenital heart failure, she started backing up, and she called, and she put her on, and her head was just enormous, and I was like, here, you need to talk to Audrey about this. And Audrey just looked at her and said, you need to get Kaylee to the hospital now, and where's your closest hospital? So they got her down to the hospital down by Macomb Hill, and they flew her up to UC Davis. So Kaylee was up at the hospital then, and so anyways, so social worker was talking to Audrey about Kaylee's equipment and trying to get it all back, and all the things they needed to detail, because Kaylee was going to go with her grandmother. And the social worker goes, oh, by the way, he says, are you still doing foster care, and are you doing complex children still? And Audrey said, well, yes, we are, and as a matter of fact, we want another complex child, because we had this little girl in January, and we phrased it, but we said she was easy, because she just needed a blood test every so often, and that was easy. And so she told Ben Daniel, the social worker, said, yeah. He said we'd be interested, and we thought maybe it was Kaylee, but it turned out it was Tiki. And so so then within a couple hours, San Joaquin County got a hold of Audrey and said, would you like to take this little Down syndrome child who was born prematurely? She has a single ventricle, and she's got Down syndrome. She's got respiratory issues. She's got this and this and this, and we were like, sure, I mean, in an enthusiastic way, because we had done it with Kaylee, and we were just used to it. All the kids we've had over the years, we were really ready. I mean, we were like, we need something more challenging, and so Tiki came to us, and she kept her promise, and so she'd been born, and fortunately her mom gave birth to her, which was a miracle, and she ended up at UC Davis, and she was there for the first 6 months of her life, and there were other foster families that were interested in her, and it was kind of interesting. I found out later, talking to Daniel Benjamin, the social worker, he said, we were talking about Tiki, and because she had been in the hospital, for one of her lengthy stays, and he said, he said it was always kind of interesting when Tiki was getting placed, because she had had 3 families before us, and there was one when we read through the paperwork that we got, that there was a family that was going to take her, and then they backed out. And he was talking to us, and he said, he said the staff commented that the other couples, when they came in, it was like they were shopping for a used car. He said, because they were asking all sorts of questions about, reimbursement and, da-da-da, and nothing. And he said, when you guys came in, they said, it was like somebody really cared. And, it makes me a little choked up, but, it was like, because we just were always, we're here to serve, and no matter what it is, we can learn how to take care, having done so much. And I'd been a fireman for 20 years, and so, I had seen a lot of things as a fireman and a lot of medical issues, so, we had seen a lot, and so we were really well prepared when we got Tiki. So they explained to us what it meant that she had a single ventricle and what she was going to have to do, and what it might mean for us to have her if she was there long term until either she went back with her mom or whatever. They were just explaining it to her about her and her longevity in life, because she just has one ventricle. And so we got Tiki, and she was number 12, and we just finalized her adoption in May. She had her surgery, the big surgery that she needed to have. She just had this last year down at Stanford, and being at UC Davis, really helped with all of that, because one, they knew Audrey and they knew she was a respiratory therapist, so that really has helped us a lot with Tiki's respiratory issues, and just being able to get her out of the hospital sooner, just because of our medical backgrounds. And the Lord was always just kind of preparing us along these ways for things. I had wanted to be a full-time fireman. I ended up just being a volunteer where we served, and I had been a volunteer where we first had bought our first house, and but I never got to be a full-time firefighter paramedic, but I got to be a firefighter EMT, and close to being a paramedic, and so God was kind of preparing that. I always think about this saying, when we were going in to serve with Village Missions, our director said, at the time, he said, God doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies those whom he's calling. So the Lord had just been really preparing us all of this time for all of these little situations and things, and moving us where he needed to move us, and to fulfill his will. And we never really said, well, this is what we're going to do. We're going to have 12 kids, like Audrey said, but people ask us, how do you do it? And I said, I don't know how we do it. We just kind of take it one day at a time, and we just take it day to day, and maybe we suffer a little bit from PTSD just from the years of doing it and taking these really challenging kids, and especially with what? Okay, it is. It's almost 7. Goodness, see what I mean? I'm talking too much. So, but anyway, so we have that's how we've gotten our 12, and how we've gotten to here. And
we rescinded our foster care license, so we're not taking any more.
Yeah. When we did that, our licensor, she called and she says, I'm just calling. Are you sure you're serious about this? Because we told her when we were finalizing Tiki, I said, yeah, we're done. And she called me about a month. She said, are you sure? And I said, yes. I said, we prayed about it, and we're done. So
how many do you have now?
we have 12.
Oh, at home, you mean?
At home.
Oh, at home. Yeah, we don't have 12 at home, no.
I always stumble on that question. 5 under 18 that we're actively raising. Ben,
Our daughter Anna, who's in her 30s now, she rents
our casita.
our little casita, our little
sad.
ADU that we built this last year, and So she's lived with us, and so she's kind of our backup, and it's great for her to be there. And so we have her, but then we have Ben and Emma, and then Mari, Jay, Ann, and Tiki. So we really have the 6 of them.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, and you know, so yeah, and then our other kids are all spread out, and some of them are married, and we have 13 grandchildren, and so 3 of our kids are married, and one has 8, one has 3, with Jaden, who we adopted, she has 3, and then Maddie, our oldest daughter, our oldest biological daughter, she and her husband live in Grass Valley, and they have 2 boys. So
Probably the most challenging thing has been figuring out how to be a grandparent at the same time as actively raising kids who are the same age as your grandchildren.
that's right. And accepting the fact now that we can get senior